watching Exit 1055 with your hosts, Richard Rose and Jennifer McLogan.
Hi, I'm Richard Rose. Welcome to Exit 1055. Today we'll talk with an expert about preserving the pine barrens on Long Island following the massive brush fires of recent weeks. You'll also hear from some talented musical artists who are overcoming special challenges. But first, we want to welcome today's co-host, Long Island reporter for TV 10 and 55, Jennifer McLogan. And you've been working on a big story, the SAT cheating scandal.
That's true. We started on that back in September. The Nassau District Attorney uncovered a gaping hole in standardized test cheatings, and unfortunately, kids were able to cheat and to take away the spots from those who played by the rules. It started at Great Neck North. All of that now prompted a national change, which we'll go into a little bit later.
Big fairness issue there. We're looking forward to that. Thanks, Jennifer. But right now, to the major wildfires that have been burning large parts of Long Island, scientists say this is a recurring problem we'll have to start getting used to. WLNY's Lou Young checked in with the experts in fire-ravaged Suffolk County.
This is called a fire-dependent ecosystem. It has to burn to survive.
And it did with a vengeance. Fire ripped through 1,100 acres of Long Island pine barren, taking homes and businesses with it, even as it cleared away years of accumulated forest ground clutter. The blaze wouldn't have been nearly so bad if we hadn't been so good at putting out previous fires. We're the victims of our own firefighting success.
Most of these woods haven't burned for 60 years. And that is why the fire was so intense.
Can we expect more of this?
We are certain of it.
So what to do? Forestry scientists say it's best to burn sections of the landscape on purpose before a wildfire can sweep through. This is part of the problem here, the tinder dry fuel that sends a wildfire on its way. Burned in this spot 3 weeks ago by the state as a preventative measure. This was a controlled burn, but critics say after decades of neglect, it's really a drop in the bucket.
But it ranges from 3 to 10 fires a year with approximately 100 or so acres that burnt.
Well, conservationists say if the state increased that controlled burning by a factor of 10, they might be getting somewhere, but they say it's a hard sell in cash-strapped Albany.
It's hard, it's difficult, it's complicated, and it's expensive to do these fuel treatments. But it's like an insurance policy. It could be more expensive later if you have a wildfire.
And in dry, windy conditions like we're experiencing now, it's only a matter of time before it happens again. In Manorville, Long Island, Lou Young, TV 1055.
And now, one of those experts that you just saw, Lou Young's story, is joining us right now. He's Dick Amper, the executive director of the Long Island Pine Barrens Society, a long-respected environmental organization committed to preserving the pine barrens and its precious underground aquifer as part of Long Island's major drinking source. Welcome to the show, Dick.
Good to be here. Thank you.
You just said in that story that there was a threat that could happen again, and then a few days later, we see 150 acres burned in Manorville, 300 homes evacuated. Are we going to be seeing this all summer long? How big is this threat?
It's a very, very big problem, and it's been building up for a long time. We're either going to develop controlled burns that are planned in advance, or we're going to face uncontrolled burns that are impossible to manage. That's the problem with an ecosystem that depends on periodic burning.
How good is it to have a controlled burn, and then who would pay for all of that?
Well, it would be very, very good, because then you would have a small fire under controlled circumstances of humidity and wind and rainfall, as opposed to what we encountered in the last 2 weeks, which was very, very bad conditions threatening the firefighters and the populate.
Well, you know, we have some figures from the State Department of Environmental Conservation back in 2007. 77.5 acres were controlled burned. Now, with a federal grant, that number jumped to 151 acres in 2008, but then down to 20 acres in 2010, back up to 114 last year, 36 this year.
You're onto the problem.
I mean, it's sort of...
Well, it's a drop in the bucket.
Going?
What we're dealing with here is about 70 acres per year for the past 15 years. In order to make this work, you'd want to burn about 1,000 acres a year, in small increments, mind you, over the course of a year, and then the buildup of leaves and of pine needles on the floor would not create that fuel load that created the inferno that our firefighters had to fight with.
A lot of homeowners were concerned about the winds, though.
The winds were outrageous. Of course, you would never conduct a controlled burn in any circumstance like that, but if you don't control the time of the burn, then you don't control the degree of it, and we can dramatically limit the ferocity and the frequency of these burns if we manage the fire instead of the fire managing us.
No, I was talking to experts from the state DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation. They point out this takes very specially trained, highly trained people to make sure you don't have fires that are accidentally set the whole pine barrens on fire.
The scientists understand these have to be set somewhere between 40 and 60 degrees. You want humidity someplace between 30 and 50%. Everything has to be just so. Then you control the amount of burning that you do, and you're working with Mother Nature, not at war with her.
And we see from the wildfires, remember back in '95, we both covered those, of course. Right. And we saw it jumping across Sunrise Highway in West Hampton. It took a number of years, though, for the forest to regenerate.
Well, the forest regenerates roughly every 12 or 14 years, so we should periodically burn it. What we've seen burned in the last couple weeks hadn't been burned for 65 and 70 years, and that creates a conflagration. Well,
we have people who are just scared out of their wits. There were people telling our reporters that they're afraid to go to bed at night. They don't know if suddenly they're going to be flames licking at their doors. We've got to find the money for this. Is it that big a priority?
Well, we do, and spending $400,000, maybe $500,000 a year as opposed to $30 million in emergency aid to rebuild and replace fire equipment and restore people's homes, not to mention the potential for loss of human life, is a small price to pay. In fact, I would say that there is no agenda that DEC has in front of it that's more important than protecting the health and safety of the people who live around that forest.
And what have you seen, Dick, in terms of the firefighter response this time as opposed to back in '95? I mean, the communication was so much better.
No, this was a textbook. We had no experience whatever in fighting forest fires on Long Island before 1995. Over the next 4 years, these people sat down and they learned from the top experts, and you could see it in the way they went after these fires. They knew what they were doing, and they got to it, and they handled it professionally, almost as though they'd lived in the Adirondacks all their lives.
Well, we'd probably like to see another federal grant and maybe some rainfall. That would help a lot, too.
That's right.
But let's talk a little bit about another topic, the Barrens River. And, you know, you've been working for the last year. Jennifer McLogan has, of course, covered this story herself.
Yep.
Trying to compromise deal between developers and folks in the town who don't want to see development near the Barrens River. What was that all about? Because it recently fell apart at the town board.
Another great Pine Barren story, and this one was a really good balance. When we figured out how to move the development that would have occurred next to the watershed, next to the river, get it away from the river, and also away from residential areas, build the kind of housing that's affordable to young people and empty nesters in the places outside of existing residential communities. It was working out fairly well. We thought we had it worked out very well. We had a lot of scientists, hydrogeologists, botanists. Everybody had this thing down right. And then we got to the local politics that you run into all over Long Island. This time it was Brookhaven town to town, geographically as large as all of Nassau County, and they just couldn't get their act together. So I think it's a big setback, but I think the commitment of everybody on Long Island to protect this regional resource is just so extraordinary that sooner or later somebody's going to wake up and say, let's not miss this opportunity.
Do you expect that this will be resolved?
I don't see it now. At the moment, everything has come to a standstill. Politics has taken over. There's petty bickering. There's no plan. But the fact of the matter is, I think that we've seen the Forge River nearby die in its entirety. I don't think Long Island is going to let that happen again.
But now the developers do have some rights, don't they? I mean, do you expect lawsuits from some of them who were hoping to build by the Barrens River? They said they had rights to it. Then the deal was forged so that they would move to other areas. Now that falls apart at the town board. Are you picking up any hint that they might want to sue?
I think that they are allowed to build. Without a new law, without an extension of the Pine Barrens Act, they're allowed to build. They own the property. They're allowed to build there, and they will. I think they'd prefer to build what's needed, where it's needed, and not there. This is the first time the environmentalists and the developers have been agreed about anything in about the last 17 years. I think if we can get together and get the politicians to pay attention, maybe there's a chance.
What is the biggest obstacle you see in preserving the East End as it is, the farms and our Pine Barrens?
Right now, that has been money. The state and the county are not buying land very much, but I have to tell you, the Community Preservation Fund, it's a real estate transfer tax that the 5 East End town voters voted for back in 1999, has now saved 6,500 acres, generated $650 million, a great success story.
All right, well, that'll have to do it. Dick Amper, Executive Director of the Long Island Pine Barren Society, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Dick. Coming up